Hi, everyone. It's Tina Ramirez, and thank you for joining me again. I am very, very excited to have with me my friend and a co-patriot, someone that we've worked together for many years on North Korea, Suzanne Scholte. Suzanne, I first got to know when I was working for in the U.S. Congress, and she was really the national champion on all things defending human rights in North Korea. At the time, she was she still is the president of the Defense Forum Foundation, but since then she's also become the honorary chairman of the Free North Korea Radio, and that's really what takes up most of her time today. But every year she does something called North Korea Freedom Week in Congress, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that and how we got to know each other and just some of the great things we were able to accomplish. But let me just say that when it comes to North Korea, I have never seen a more devastating country in the world. I think Burma is probably like second to that, which is, it's a close second. But the situation in North Korea is kind of like walking into the twilight zone, in my opinion, where it's just unbelievable about how a dictatorship can take over a country and just so brutally terrorize the people that they have no concept of anything else outside of their horrifying grave existence that literally feels like they're living in black and white. So, Suzanne, thank you for being with me. And I know that I can't do justice to describing it. So I appreciate that you're here with us to really help us understand what's happening in North Korea and in many other countries where you and I have worked, like the Western Sahara, and all of the great work that you do. So thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Tina.
So, okay, let's just get out and start. I traveled with you, not to North Korea, but actually to Western Sahara first. And so these are the two passions that have really inspired your work for many years now. Can you tell me a little bit about, why you advocate for the North Koreans and the Sahrawis? What motivates that?
Honestly, I can't separate it from my faith because I started working on Western Sahara. I visited the refugee camps of the Sahrawis in 1994. And I remember climbing up a big sand berm and praying and thinking, boy, my prayer is really being amplified because I am the only person praying to Jesus in in this whole land, because there had not been that a lot of Americans that had traveled to the refugee camps. But I fell in love with the Sahrawis. They're the most amazing, noblest people I've ever met. And then with North Korea, I started bringing over defectors to testify in the late 1990s, to testify in Congress about basically the first that ever testified in the US Congress about what was happening in North Korea, because everybody was focused on the nuclear issue. Even today, we're switching back to the nuclear issue because we're concerned about that. But no, we're not paying attention to the horrible suffering that's happening to the North Korean people. So I had the honor and have had the honor of hosting hundreds and hundreds, but I did host the first North Korean defectors. And I remember it took me a year to get a hearing in 1999 on the Hill about the political prison camps. And after that hearing, the State Department blocked the story that VOA had written about the political prison camps. And the VOA reporter was I carry with me all the time, but the VOA reporter was so upset. Yeah, this is the State Department X'd it out, and they wouldn't run the story about a congressional hearing that was actually organized by then Senator John Kerry and then Senator Craig Thomas, Kerry being the Democrat, and then Thomas being the Republican, about the political prison camps. And then but the State Department blocked it and wouldn't run the editorial because they said it's only based on defectors, question of accuracy. And the timing wasn't good because they're about to have the four-party talks. So this is what the kind of policy of ignoring the suffering there. But after that happened, I was crying out to God. I had nightmares hearing about these political prison camps, which are this death camps where hundreds of thousands of people, millions have died, children are even there, and just crying out to God, we're finally getting attention to this, and this happens, and why do I have to keep doing this? And I just heard God's voice. And he said, I was answering your prayer. And then I remembered I had prayed in the 1990s that God would break my heart for what was breaking his heart. So I really feel the people of North Korea and the people of Western Sahara, They're obviously Asians and Africans. They're obviously different ethnicities. But let me tell you, the suffering that they always make the top 10 of the world's most persecuted people. But God is on the move in the hearts of both these nations. The Sahrawi are amazing. They are uh, just suffering because they are very noble, and they believe in the rule of law, and they believe in equality for women, and they have adopted a constitution after ours. And because they were relying on the international community and the UN and the corrupt institutions, they are still suffering. So I felt God called me to be involved with them. And then with North Korea, well, with the Western Sahara, as you know, because you do work in that North Africa, the Middle East, they've got everything that we wanted to achieve in Iraq and Afghanistan. They modeled their constitution after ours. They have a system of government that calls for free market economy, equal rights for women, religious freedom. The president of Western Sahara, the former president of Western Sahara, Mohammed Abdulaziz, I saw him speak in an African American church in California, LA, Dr. Frederick Price's church, and he said, when we get our country back, come plant your churches, because we want to be known as a land of freedom of religion. What Muslim leader has ever done that? So that's Western Sahara, and it's on God's heart because he put it on mine. And then with North Korea, you know, a lot of people, well, you know this, but a lot of people don't know this, but Pyongyang used to be known as the Oriental Jerusalem, where they had the biggest revival that's described as the greatest manifestation of the Holy Spirit since the book of Acts, 1907. So the church was alive and thriving in North Korea in 1907. And it's a fact that half the signers of the Korean Declaration of Independence were Christians. This is the declaration under the Japanese for North Korea to be free of Japanese colonization, when the population of Christians was probably only like 15, 20% maybe. So it was the Christians that was the most active in Korea, standing up for the freedom of the people. And I think that Kim Il-sung, the first dictator, saw that, and he twisted the religion of the Christian religion to turn it into worshiping him. So those are the two places that God really pulled me into. So I can't separate my faith from why I'm so involved in them. But I think North Koreans is the key to also advancing the freedom in Asia as a wedge against China, which is communist China, but also to help the underground church in China, and also the people in China that wish to have freedom from communism. And then, of course, with Western Sahara. I mean, can you imagine if we had had a pro-West Muslim democracy in Western Sahara, what that would mean for that region and for women in the Middle East? And so I think that's why those two places have basically taken much of my attention. Very long answer. Sorry.
It's okay. That was great. Well, I think that was a really enticing opening, so I appreciate it. And I am amazed because I didn't realize that you had only just started doing the political prisoner work in 1999. I mean, we'll go into the whole history of North Korea and everything, but I'm amazed at it, that no one had been calling out against these atrocities before that. And then I also, at some point, I want to talk about the bipartisanship, because that was always the major part of both of those issues, which most people aren't aware of. So just let me take one step back. Tell me about Defense Forum Foundation and the North Korea Free Radio. Tell me about these two entities that you work with.
Well, with Defense Forum Foundation was actually founded in the 1980s during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And the purpose of the foundation was to articulate in a bipartisan way why we needed to rebuild our national defense after the Jimmy Carter years. And back there was
You could say that again.
What's that?
You could say that again.
Rebuilding our defense.
Well, we're in 2.0 right now, so we're gonna have to do it again soon.
Yeah. Well, the concept of peace through strength was then a very, very bipartisan belief that if we really don't want to be the world's police. America, I mean, most Americans, we don't want to be the world's police. But the problem is, if we are not the ones that are the leaders in the world, then the other people that are going to be the leaders in the world do not have your best interest at heart.
Like China.
Yeah, exactly. Like China. And so it's like Condoleezza Rice used to say this, we don't like having to be there, but we have to be because we open up a vacuum for evildoers, which is
Right.
what happens when we step back. So the whole concept of peace through strength. So we did the forums. That's what DFF got started, was to articulate for the Congress, members of Congress, the staff, essentially, what is needed to help rebuild our defenses, whether the Navy, the Army, Air Force. We would bring in all these speakers. And what was wonderful is it was Democrats and Republicans that were attended, but also that sponsored the forums. And really strong bipartisan participation. But when I became the chairman, or I'm sorry, when I became the president of the Defense Forum Foundation, and this was in the 1988 period, I realized that you can't just worry about America's defense. You should look at the countries that are the evil actors in the world. Who are the countries that are a threat? What do they all have in common? They all have the exact same thing in common. Every single country that's a threat to peace is also a threat to their own people, without exception. So I thought, I can't just worry about America. And at that point, we had rebuilt our defenses. I have to also worry about what these people are, these countries are doing to their own people. And thus I got involved in hosting defectors from different countries. And Soviet Union at the time, I would bring in these, oh my gosh, amazing people who had defected and ask them, why did you turn against your homeland? Why did you turn against the Soviet Union? And they would explain their stories. And this Cubans that had defected, Chinese, that I was the one that first hosted Harry Wu, who was a survivor of the Lao guy. Amazing man. And just different dissidents, defectors that had escaped. And just to share one story, this Cuban, Orestes Lorenzo, one of the first Cubans that we hosted, he had been a pilot, an Air Force pilot in Cuba. And I know Alicia said it's good to tell stories. But
Yes.
with Orestes Lorenzo, he was an up-and-comer in the Cuban Air Force. And because of that, he got to go to the great Soviet Union. His wife was a nurse. He had 2 sons, and he got to study abroad in the Soviet Union. Well, he gets to Moscow, and he's like, oh my gosh, this is where Cuba's going? This is the great Soviet Union? This is who we're supposed to laud? I mean, they were shocked at how terrible the conditions were. And his wife was a nurse, and they're in the medical course in the medical profession. And by then, at that time, Cuba's medical profession or medical institutions were a complete disaster. Now they are, but at that time, Cuba still had a pretty good medical system. Well, this medical system in the Soviet Union was just horrific. And the turning point for Orestes Lorenzo was his son got really ill, and his wife said, I don't think we should take him to the hospital here. I think it would make it worse. And she said, I think we should pray for our son. And he goes, oh, I think we should too. I didn't know you were a Christian. It turns out they were both believers, but they were afraid to tell each other because it's, communist country. You're not supposed to have faith. But anyway, this was during Glasnost. So he starts reading in the libraries there. They've opened up. Gorbachev has started to open up about information. And he starts thinking, you know what? Maybe capitalism isn't so bad. Maybe communism is not really the right way to go, because if Cuba is heading to more and more towards the Soviet Union, I don't think this is good for the Cuban people. So he makes up his mind that he's going to defect. So the family gets back to Cuba, and he actually took a Soviet MiG and flew it to Florida. And he signaled, I'm defecting, I'm defecting, I'm defecting. And he thinks in his mind, he tells the story of how he thought, oh, shoot, there's one thing I forgot about. The color of my skin. And he thinks all the propaganda films, he says, capitalism may be good, democracy may be good, but I forgot about the racist part of this. All the films he ever saw were only white people were rich in America. Everybody else lived in poverty that wasn't white. And he's thinking, that's the one thing I forgot to take into account. I'm Hispanic. But anyway, he said he landed his plane, and then he lifted he's signaling, I'm defecting, I'm defecting, I'm defecting. And so he flips open the canopy of the plane. The first person that greets him is this African-American Air Force colonel.
Oh,
grabs his hand and says, "Welcome to freedom." And then at that moment he thought, "Oh, they lied about that too." And
wow.
so anyway, then he's thinking that since he's defected that Castro's gonna let his family go. What were you thinking?
Oh,
So
man.
he refused to let the family go, and he ends up, of course, the family denies him. "Oh, we didn't know he was gonna do that," you know? So he ends up, going through the Catholic charities, the Catholic, relief services, and he reaches out to them, and a very wealthy Cuban American, uh, businesswoman gets him, a Cessna, and he actually signals to this relief agency to tell his family to go to the beach one day, and he flies because he's was in the Air Force, so he knows how to avoid all the radar, and he flew his plane into this beach this beach town. He lands in the road, and his wife and son look up and go, "That must be daddy." So they
Oh
run and
my
get him.
gosh.
That's what got his family out. And I keep telling him,
Wow.
you gotta make a movie about this." But he
They
wrote a book.
do. Oh my goodness. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Why
yeah.
isn't there one?
I don't know. This is the name of this book is Wings of the Morning. The Wings of the Morning. But anyway, that's the kind of person we're bringing in to tell their stories on the Hill. And I'm thinking,
Well, I used to go to them every month. I would
yeah,
go, I mean, I think it was once a month. I would go to these
yeah.
and they were amazing.
Yeah. So that's how I got involved with North Korea, is that I thought, we hear all these stories from people that escaped from Cuba, the Soviet Union, China, but what about people from North Korea? We never hear about anybody from North Korea. So 1996, I started beating down the doors of the South Korean embassy because there weren't a lot of defectors.
Hmm.
And every one of them was under protection by the South Korean government. And I started beating down their doors and saying, can we hear from a North Korean? And it took me a year, and they finally said, yeah, it's probably a good idea. So we hosted a Soviet colonel and I'm sorry, a North Korean army colonel and a diplomat. Okay. These were the first North Korean defectors that had ever testified
Wow.
in the United States about what was going on. And the interesting story is they stood in front of our forum to tell their stories, and the army colonel said, "Look at us." This is like 1997. "Look at us." The army colonel was really robust and looked like he never missed a meal. The diplomat was really tall and scrawny. And he said, "I can promise you, all the humanitarian aid you're sending to North Korea, it's military first. Then it gets to the diplomats. The people aren't seeing any of it." And they basically described how they were diverting the humanitarian aid, how the trucks would roll in from the humanitarian agencies, and they would, hand off. Let's say, for example, hand off some rice to the Kim family, and then they drive away. And then the army would roll in unmarked trucks, go to the Kim family, and take that rice back. I mean, they literally taking it. And some of the humanitarian workers were describing how if you had gone into a nursing, like a school, and you would hand out cookies, they noticed that the kids would hold the cookies like this because they were expecting them to be taken away. so, so anyway, this diversion and everything. So these were the first defectors that had ever testified about what was going on inside North Korea. And it was fascinating to hear their stories. And then we got involved in hosting people that were victims of trafficking, women, refugees, political prison camp survivors, and just hundreds and hundreds of. But
Well,
you wanted to ask about Free North Korea Radio.
yeah. Well, I mean, just to say that it was so informative at the time. I mean, most people don't know that there's this much active eh, information about human rights issues on the Hill, and who is leading it. And this has been going on for a long time, really since the 90s. You had some major heroes up there that were leading it, both Republicans and Democrats, and and just informing Congress so that they could respond and care and do something in parts of the world where people weren't free. And I think it's important for Americans to know that this is taking place. It's been taking place for a long time. I mean, 1998 was the International Religious Freedom Act, but even before that, you were 10 years you were hosting these, and just laying the groundwork for what people needed to respond to around the world. So thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. Free North Korea Radio is a very unique partnership between American citizens and North Korean defectors. And it's based in Seoul. The defectors produce the programs, and the Americans pay for the transmission cost. All of it. All the transmission costs are covered by Americans. Now that includes individual Americans and Christian in churches, Korean American churches, and it's amazing. We broadcast. It's an hour program in the morning, an hour program in the evening. 30 minutes is news and information. 30 minutes is a gospel program, and it's all basically giving them the truth. Our motto is the truth will set them free, because the people in North Korea are so brainwashed from childhood to hate Americans, to think that we're their enemy. They think we started the Korean War. They think we occupy South Korea. That's a colony, and that people are abused. Like we're the colonizers, like Japan was the colonizers. They don't know that we were the liberators. So it's basically spreading true information. The comparisons between North and South Korea is one program, because the North Koreans are brainwashed that South Korea is, they live horrible lives because they're abused in the colony of America. So all these horrific lies. So we just give them the truth. And just to give you one fun thing, because this is connected to Capitol Hill, one of the things I love is we do this program twice a year. It's for the New Year, Salal. The Korean New Year is known as Salal. And we do it for August 15th, which is Korean Liberation Day. We go to members of Congress and we ask them, what would you like to share with the people of North Korea if you had a chance to talk to them about the New Year or about Liberation Day? And we get these powerful messages from Democrats and Republicans, and then we start broadcasting them to North Korea. And it is amazing the response that has come from this program, because they're seeing from the Congress, who represent the American people, how much we really care about them. An amazing thing happened. That a couple years ago, we had portraits, these beautiful portraits. They just shimmered. They were silk woven portraits that came out of Ted Cruz, Ed Royce, who was in the Congress at the time, and Chris Smith. And you know Chris Smith. I mean, is there a greater human rights champion in
Oh, he's
Congress?
great.
Yeah,
Exactly.
he's
Yeah.
any human rights issue. And the portraits were smuggled out of North Korea, and they came with a note that said, please give these portraits to the American politicians. Tell them there are two brothers in a very dark place that still have hope because of their messages.
Wow.
The two brothers lived in Pyongyang. If they had been caught making those portraits, they would have been executed or sent to a political prison camp for a slow death. It was remarkable. We got another response back from a Korean Workers' Party member who said, I've always been told Americans were bastards. When I heard these messages, I couldn't believe it. I recorded them and played them over and over and over again. So it's just like, it was just breaking down this propaganda. So Free North Korea Radio is this amazing program. Like I said, it's 100% supported by Americans, and the programs are produced by North Korean defectors. It's a unique partnership, but we rely solely on private donations so we can have the program be, done the way that it should be done by the North Korean defectors. There's nothing more powerful than North Korean defectors reaching out to their brothers and sisters with the truth. And we just got named, when this program airs, we can tell you that we were named in 2021 for the first time the most popular website in South Korea. It's based on hits for information about North Korea. We outperformed every single other media entity with 112 times our budget. I mean,
That's amazing.
Our budget is like a fraction. So
people need to support it.
Yeah, Free North Korea Radio. It's a great program.
That's amazing, Suzanne. I remember every year North Korea Freedom Week and just hearing the stories of the defectors that would come. And so we could talk a little bit about it, but so every year you would do North Korea Freedom Week, and you did it for a lot longer than when I was on the Hill. But when I was on the Hill, we would help coordinate it. And you just brought in the most heartbreaking stories of people. And I want you to share a couple of those things and what North Korea Freedom Week is, that people know. I don't think people can ever fully understand, but somebody explained it to me once, a big humanitarian agency, a guy, VP there, he had said, we flew our plane into North Korea, and you drive on these roads to deliver stuff. And he said, you'll come to like a fork in the road, and the roads just stop. He said, they have the roads out of the city to make it look like there's something there, that this is this great country. But literally, when you start driving, out into the rural areas, the roads just stop. It just, it's all just, it's all a setup. None of it's real. And then of course, how the people live. So tell me about North Korea Freedom Week, the types of people that came and the stories that they shared. And when is this week? Because it's important everybody understands, so they can pay attention to it for when it comes up.
Well, I have to say, I'm so grateful to you, because when you were on the Hill, your nickname was Bulldog, because you would get things done. If we would have bringing these witnesses, and you would help organize, hearings and briefings and whatever you could do to give them a chance. And it was so hard to get people to pay attention to North Korea at the time, because there's so many other things that we need to be worried about. Why should we worry about North Korea on the other side of the globe? But it was really hard to get people to pay attention to what was happening there. And it took years, but now there's no dispute. We've been saying it, you knew it, that North Korea was the worst human rights tragedy, the worst dictatorship. But it took a long time to get that acknowledged by the Congress. And I think the North Korea Freedom Week was one of the reasons why that happened, because we would bring in these witnesses, and when you could hear from people that survived these political prison camps, you couldn't forget their stories, the bravery, and just to hear about the political prison camps where even children. I mean, what makes North Korea unique? I think it's the only place in the world where children can be born in camps. These political prisoner camps are basically death camps. And when somebody's accused of a crime in North Korea, the entire family gets sent to a political prison camp. So like Kang Chul-hwan, who wrote Aquarians of Pyongyang, he was one of the witnesses that we brought over to talk about the camps. But he went to the political prison camp when he was 8 years old, because his grandfather turned against the regime and made some negative comment about the regime. So almost the entire family was sent to these camps. And then you have Shin Dong-hyuk, who we also hosted it during North Korea Freedom Week some years back, who was actually born in a camp and didn't know there was a life outside these political prison camps. So just bringing them here was amazing. But I have to share one story about, I think that is important to understand. Kim Ok-gum is a woman that we hosted. But during North Korea Freedom Week, you always helped us set up briefings and give these people a chance to be heard. But there's this one woman, Kim Ok-gum, and I want to tell her story because I think it gives you an idea of the power of the human spirit and the power of family, and something that's intrinsic. I think especially with Hardwired, people with Hardwired will understand this. But Kim Ok-gum, during the suffering, the famine, there was this period in 1990. I didn't mention that earlier, but 1990 was the arduous march when the Soviet Union collapsed. North Korea lost their biggest benefactor. And because Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il are such horrible managers, there was this massive starvation that broke out in North Korea. It was known as the arduous march. And during that period was when a lot of these refugees were starting to escape. And I had gotten involved right around that period in the mid-1990s. But anyway, because there weren't a lot of witnesses or survivors, a lot of people didn't know how bad the suffering was. We were saying 3 million people are going to die or have died. And they were saying, oh, no, it's only 500,000 or whatever. But I mean, our government even. But we came to realize it was that many. But nobody was really paying attention to it in time. But just to give you an example, Kim Ok-gum, she was married and she had a 10-year-old son. And she what the women were really the breadwinners in the families during the arduous march, because the men had to go to work and not get paid. They weren't getting paid, but they had to go to work. So women were the ones that were starting to come up with ways to help the family survive. And a lot of them ended up getting trafficked to China, because the Chinese, you got a country, North Korea, where there's starvation and the women are the head of the household trying to save the families. Then you have China, which has a one-child policy. So there's a shortage of women, and you have a recipe for a horrible disaster. So women would end up being lured to China because they thought they were going to get a job. And the next thing they know, a hood was put over their head and end up at a market and bought, sold, just like a slave market. from the horrible days of slavery in our country. No different than that. A young woman would be more valuable than an older woman, but basically they were sold. 80 to 90% of women end up being trafficked in North Korea. So that's one of the things. I know you helped us get a hearing on on what was going on with the trafficking, because nobody's paying attention to that issue either. And it was so hard to get women to speak out about their own experiences
Well, and
about
it's important, just important for people to understand the Chinese government was complicit in this
yes,
because the
yes.
one child policy left them without females. And so they were complicit in this trafficking of women out of North Korea. And share, share what happened to these women, because I remember one of them talking about the bars that were shoved up her body parts and just horrific.
Yeah.
They were so brutally treated. It's beyond comprehension.
Well, we would bring witnesses over, and during one North Korea Freedom Week, we had a couple witnesses, but they backed out. They got nervous about speaking out because there's such a stigma of that happening to you anyway, especially in the Asian culture. And their attitude was, well, if anybody hears about what happened to me, then no man will ever want to marry me. And so these were young North Korean women had been abused, so they wouldn't speak out. But finally, Mrs. Ma and Mrs. Cha, I will never forget them. They both had been Mrs. Yeah, they both had been sold several times. Mrs. Ma's case, she had come across with her daughters, and they got separated, and they got sold to different men, but they were willing to tell their stories. And it was the first time we'd ever had a hearing on the trafficking of North Korean women. Of course, Chris Smith was one of the speakers, but because China won't recognize them, they are complicit. They won't recognize them as refugees because China says they're not crossing the border because of persecution. They're crossing the border for hunger, so they're economic migrants. So China won't recognize them, even though the moment they cross the border, it's a crime against the state to have left North Korea, punishable by death. So the moment they cross the border, they meet the definition of a refugee who will be persecuted. But China refuses to accept that. So it puts everyone's vulnerable who's a North Korean. So it puts these women at terrible risk. But what we see the trend now is women ending up in being in brothels, and women end up being forced to do internet pornography. And contributing to that horrible thing is that often the people that are watching this pornography are South Koreans, not even realizing the woman they're watching is being held against her will. So it's terrible. But if you could just imagine a vulnerable population that is going to be abused because of where they end up in China, it's just a terrible situation. But Mrs. Ma and Mrs. Cha, they were the first North Koreans to speak out about the trafficking issue. And I remember Mrs. Ma saying, I'm not a very brave person. But at the end of it, the congressman that was at the hearing said, I have to disagree with the one thing you said in your testimony. You are a very brave person. But it was so hard to get that issue out there. And now it's acknowledged and people are paying attention to it. But I want to tell you, Mrs. Kim Ok-gum. Mrs. Kim Ok-gum was a North Korean. Started to tell her story, and then I got off track about the trafficking thing. But she came to speak out. We arranged also for her to go to the UN to testify at the United Nations. And it was when John Bolton was still in ambassador up there. The last act he did was to get the UN to do a session that they hosted on North Korea human rights, because the UN hadn't touched this issue. I know we're going to talk about the UN a little bit, but anyway, but Kim Ok-gum, I'm taking her on a train up to from Washington, D.C. to New York, Amtrak. And I'll never forget the story like it was yesterday. And she starts to tell me about how what happened with her is she had to feed her husband and son. And like so many North Korean women, she decided to go to China to try to get work there. And she crossed the border. Fortunately, she wasn't trafficked, but she did get arrested, and she was put in a detention center and held in China, and then repatriated back to North Korea. Well, every single North Korean refugee who's repatriated back to North Korea will be tortured, will be imprisoned, in some cases executed. And so in her case, she was incarcerated because of the crime of crossing the border. basically the crime of trying to feed her family. So she ends up, she tells me, was so blessed because I ended up being on a farm as I worked on the detention facility I was in was a working farm. And she said, I was so blessed to be able to do that because I was able to have access to bugs. And she tells me how she would catch grasshoppers and their little beady eyes, she would force herself to eat the grasshoppers because she knew they were protein. And she was so bound and determined to survive that incarceration so she could be reunited with her husband and son. So she did that. She survived and she did her time, a couple of years, and she was released. And she goes home to her hometown. She finds out her son has died of starvation. And her husband, not wanting to be affiliated with a wife that was in a political prison camp, even though his wife was there because she was trying to save him, had divorced her while she was incarcerated. So she's like so despondent. She's like, I don't want to live anymore. I mean, I might as well just go back to China and try to survive there. What's the point? So she crosses the border and she goes to China again. She gets arrested again. She ends up in a detention center in China again. And she's in a cell with a woman who is sobbing uncontrollably. And she's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? She says, I left my 14-year-old daughter back in North Korea. I don't know what's going to happen to her. And this woman is just crying her eyes out. And Kim O-gum is like, I've got to help this woman. So Kim O-gum helps this woman escape. And as a result, the Chinese guards beat her and almost to death. And they almost broke her back. A Korean American named Pastor Philip Buck hears about her story, and he raises enough money to bribe the guards and get her out of that prison and shelters her, and she eventually makes it to South Korea. Now she's in South Korea. But the reason why I tell you this story is Mrs. Gum at the time was not a Christian, all right? She doesn't even know about God, but she suffered terribly, but she saw in this somebody going through the same thing that she was going through. And as Christians, we are compelled to help others. She wasn't compelled to help this other woman, but through her own this own action, she put her own life at risk to help save this other woman. And it just shows me the power of the human spirit that she would do something like that. And I'm really pleased to tell you that she's happily married. She lives in Busan, and she's an elder in the church there. She's become a believer. But I just share that story because she's always somebody that's inspired me about that. And then, of course, with Mrs. Ma and Mrs. Cha and some of the North Korean refugees that I've spoken to, one of the things they've told me is that when they hear about things that we're doing, when they hear about what you were doing on the Hill, raising these issues, it gave them a reason to live. And I've talked to North Korean women. We do these protests at the we're going to talk about Save North Korean Refugee Day in a minute, but we do these protests. But I've talked to people who said, because I heard about that, it gave me the will to keep on living, because I heard that people were talking about this situation, that we weren't alone, that we weren't in the dark, that people did know about our suffering. So that's why it's so important to speak out about human rights issues.
I still remember the movie we showed of the soccer player. I don't remember his full story, but I remember he finally escaped, and then he tried to get his family out, and his young son had to walk across like the Siberian desert or something in the end. And I don't even remember if he survived or didn't survive in the end. And it was just this heartbreaking story of this famous soccer player from North Korea that finally escaped. And it's when you hear any of these stories, you just are so grateful for the freedom we have, but very compelled to say, how can we who have freedom not stand up for those that don't have it? No one should be living like this. I mean, yes, at Hardwired, we say no one's hardwired to live this way. We're all hardwired to be free and to live with dignity. And so it's amazing to me that we can squabble over such silly little things here in America when people are literally being starved to death, forced to eat crickets. But at worst, I mean, we know that they have no food. So tell me, I think it would be helpful to put a little bit of context. Can you give me like just a couple of minutes of just give me North Korea in a box? Kim Il-sung comes in, forces everyone 3 generations down into re-education camps that doesn't support him, and what that looks like living in a refugee camp or in a re-education camp, sorry. Um, just can you give me a quick, like,
Yeah, I have a dear friend who works on Cuba, and she and I used to argue about which country's worse, which is the worst country in the world. She had to concede I was right, North Korea. But this is the only country in the world that does not enjoy a single human right, not a single human right. And the irony of that is that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was passed in 1948 in response to the horrors that happened during World War II and by Germany and Japan. And that is the same year, 1948, Kim Il-sung came to power to establish the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK. This is the only country, in other words, that means you do not have the right to travel. You don't have the right to go to live where you want to live, to have the job you want to have. Everything comes from the government. It's a place where there's obviously no freedom of expression. If you are say or do anything that can be misconstrued as against the regime, you can be sent to a political prison camp. These camps are basically death camps. There's several different kinds of camps. One is the camps that are long term where you go to die. You're never going to get out. There's others where you're rehabilitated and you can be released, but you don't know how long you're going to be there. You don't even know why you're there. And you're there and you're sent with your families. And then there's the detention centers in every single province. And that's where a lot of the refugees that are repatriated end up initially is in these detention centers in every single province. Um, and so these were established by Kim Il-sung when he became the dictator. It's like any communist country has to have political prison camps to get rid of your enemies. So most of the people that would have been sent there, because he established a theocracy where he is God, a lot of the people that were sent there were Christians. And a lot of people that are in these camps are Christians, because you cannot believe in God and be a North Korean under this regime, because you are raised to worship Kim Il-sung and the Kim family as your God. Kim Jong-il was set up as the Christ figure, and the Juche religion is like the Holy Spirit. So they even perverted the Holy Trinity. They've taken the Apostles' Creed to a creed to Kim Jong-un. They've taken the like the daily prayers you say at a meal. It's thank you, Father Kim Il-sung, for my meal. Everything's coming from the dictatorship. So there's this brainwashing from childbirth. If you went into a kindergarten as an American, you'd be sick to your stomach, because it would be likely there would be a mural on the wall of an American soldier with a bayonet stabbing a pregnant woman, because that's their image of Americans. And you're taught in grade school, for example, the brainwashing starts in kindergarten, but you're taught in elementary school. Give you an example of a math book. If your friend threw two grenades and you threw 3 grenades, how many American GIs would you kill? So that's how they make them hate Americans. It's terrible, but that's their, we're learning, carrots and sticks maybe, but they're learning by how many Americans you can kill. So brainwashing, the threat of being sent to a camp for not complete loyal to the regime. The other thing is being cut off from outside information. They are cut off. If they find you listening to a radio broadcast like Free North Korea, you could be sent to a political prison camp. And by the way, they can't stop that anymore. They had to decriminalize it because the information flow has been powerful. There's so many people that have access to information in North Korea now, but you're only supposed to watch the government propaganda. They do have a cell phone system, but it's controlled by the regime. It's a closed loop system. They do have an intranet closed. You're not allowed to look at information on the outside from the outside world. So complete surveillance state where everybody's watching everybody else, and the most repressive place on earth. It's really hard to imagine, but I got to tell you one story. One of our reporters, she said that she lived in the northern part of North Korea, and she went to visit her aunt. She had the permission to go. She had to get permission to travel there, but she got to visit her aunt who lived near the DMZ. And she said when she saw the DMZ and she saw all the lights coming from South Korea, she actually believed that the South Koreans just flashed those lights to try to show people in North Korea that they had some sort of prosperity. She thought it was a complete lie. Where are all those lights? Oh, that's just the South Koreans trying to show that they have prosperity. But if you look at a map of the Korean Peninsula at night, it's shocking. It's shocking because you will see this big black area that looks like it's got to be like sea, ocean. It's North Korea. And there'll be one place that's where you can see light coming from, and that's Pyongyang, and that's the Kim Jong Il and the Kim Il Sung statues. But seriously, it's a land of darkness, and it's and ruled by very, very evil people.
Suzanne, before we switch to Western Sahara, what else can you say about what can be done? I know you've been to the United Nations, you've been in Congress. I mean, we just hear it keep getting worse.
Well, I'll tell you,
can be done?
Yeah, the North Korea Freedom Coalition, nkfreedom.org, which Tina, you helped a lot when you were on the Hill. The North Korea Freedom Coalition is a grassroots group of just people, volunteers. There's no membership fee. It's just people that come together to promote the freedom, human rights of the North Korean people. And we sponsor annual North Korea Freedom Week every April. We have it in Seoul. We have it in DC. We switch back and forth. We did it all online, of course, because of COVID last April. But it's a time for people to come together to focus on these issues. It's because of North Korea Freedom Week, defectors met the President of the United States. We have the congressional hearings, rallies, prayer vigils. That's every April, and everybody can be a part of that in some way, even if it's online. We also have Save North Korean Refugees Day, which we hold in September on the 24th, because that's the day China became a signatory of the Refugee Convention. So September 24th is a reminder to China, you're violating your own international treaty obligations by forcing these people back, and calling on China just to let them go to South Korea. So so getting involved in the North Korea Freedom Coalition is a great way to be involved. We do all kinds of fun, important things that people can help with. We have a program we call Letters from America, where we get Americans just to send a message to people in North Korea, and any American can take part in that. And then, of course, supporting Free North Korea Radio. Those are just some of the things, but another thing we do, we try to match people up. For example, we found we helped a gentleman who has a passion for helping rescue orphans. He is the son of a Holocaust survivor. His father was orphaned during the Holocaust. He's a passion for helping refugees. So we matched him up with a gentleman who's very much involved in saving orphans. We have another group, Christian Freedom International. They have a passion for spreading the gospel. We matched them up with an organization that's using these rice bottles they send these in by sea into North Korea, and Bible, rice, flash drives, US $1 bill. So we've basically got them lined up. And then with Free North Korea Radio, our foundation, that's Defense Forum Foundation, sponsors that, but we matched our foundation up with the Free North Korea Radio. So we kind of bring people in for whatever their passion is, but there's so many ways to be involved. If you care about orphans, if you care about religious freedom, if you care about protecting women, if you care about promoting freedom and human rights, all these things we are involved in some way when it comes to North Korea.
And you do a balloon drop too. Are you still doing that?
Well, that's an interesting question. That's a very good question. Yeah, we have been very involved in sponsoring balloon launches into North Korea. They were so effective that the South Korean government, under Moon Jae-in, who hopefully won't be there by the time this thing airs. Oh, he won't be there because he's up for re-election in April. But the government of Moon banned these leafleting. They made it illegal. But when but my colleagues won't stop. And an interesting case is going on right now. Okay, the balloon launches and the rice bottle launches were banned.
You don't have one. It's like a big red balloon with all this text on it in Korean, right?
Well, there's several different kinds. I don't know if I have a picture. Oh, yeah, that's kind of a picture. Yeah, that's a kind of a picture right there. And then we have sent in like leaflets. This is excerpts from the
Yeah.
Universal Declaration of Human Rights, just to tell them about, hey, you have the right to live where you want to live. Hey, you should be able to go
So
visit.
they were so effective that the South Koreans said, you guys got to stop. This is hurting
Yeah,
our relationship.
but this is going to be interesting how this plays out, because we've been using the rice bottles, and we did the messages from the new year of Salel for North Korea Freedom Week. And what we did was we took excerpts. Senator Chris Coons, uh, Senator John Barrasso, Congressman Chris Smith, Congressman Alan Lowenthal, Democrats, Republicans. We took excerpts from their messages, and with their pictures, and then in Korean text, with the background music, Edelweiss, bless my homeland forever, we made this message for North Korea Freedom Week. And the defectors loved it. They loved it so much. They put it on flash drives and started sending it in these rice bottles, all during the summer of 2020.
I mean, so people have
2021.
laptops. People have laptops.
Oh yeah,
across
yeah,
Korea
yeah,
now.
yeah. I have to tell
They
you
just
about that.
can't. They just can't access most information.
No tells. I'll tell you what happened there. But anyway, they started sending these in. Well, my little brother, Kim Sung-min, who's the head of Free North Korea Radio, the South Korean Army, I'm sorry, South Korean Navy found a couple of these, looked at that, saw that they knew it was Free North Korea Radio, knew it was us, turned it over to the police. The police have been investigating him. But what's on the flash drive? Messages from, Joe Biden's senator from Delaware. I mean, are they going to really put him in jail because they were sending these messages in? So it's a very controversial, hot topic right now. But who demanded that these balloon launches and the rice bottle launches stop? Kim Jong-un and his twisted sister, Kim Yong-jong. Kim Yong-jong. They demanded these stop. Why did they demand they stop? Because they're having such an impact. And they took the loudspeakers down at the DMZ. Most of the army, most of the Navy, and most of the military in North Korea, their station, North Korean soldiers, are within earshot of the DMZ. Most of their assets are near the DMZ, right? And these loudspeakers were extremely effective because they're just broadcasting news and information from South Korea. K-pop music has gotten really popular too. But in answer to your question, the defectors, again, the defectors are amazing. But what they did was they found out that there's this thing called a no-tel. It's manufactured in China. It's like a mini notebook. Okay, it's called a note-tel. It has a place for SD card. It can play a CD. It's multimedia. Now, you can't get the radio. You can't get on they only have an internet. But this thing is great for using to spread information. And for example, they have this thing called the SD, these, let's see if I have one in here, but they're small flash drives. Yeah, here we go. I mean, that are really small. This has got the movie 48M, which is created by Defectors on it. But they use these, to get information. And I think I showed you. I think there's one in here, very small, SD card, flash drive, whatever. But these they use to trade information around. And in fact, there's K-pop music has gotten so popular in South Korean soap operas. K-pop music has gotten so popular that the regime is starting to crack down and tell people you cannot listen to this propaganda. You can't listen to the South Korean pop music. And they've said that, K-pop is poisonous to their minds. So, but you know what? There's this desire, just like the North Korean defectors. They said, Suzanne, we don't care if the South Koreans arrest us. We are going to keep sending these things in. We don't care if we end up in jail for trying to reach out to our brothers and sisters in North Korea. Same thing with the North Koreans in North Korea. Under this regime, they're like sending this information around. And there's this soap opera that got really popular called Crash Landing to Meet You. Crash Landing to Meet You on Netflix. It was running on Netflix, but it's about a South Korean heiress who crash lands in North Korea. And the whole story, it's very funny. A lot of the South Koreans I know don't really like it because they don't think it shows North Korea as bad as it is. But they've been putting it in flash drives and sending it in into North Korea. And North Koreans know if somebody's watched it, if they ever talk about fried chicken.
Oh.
because chicken uh, in this Netflix show, there's a bunch of scenes with it in Bonchon, this restaurant, which is all it's like Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's like fried chicken restaurant. In North Korea, if you have chicken, it may be once in your life on the day you're married because it's such a scarcity. The food, is such a scarcity. And so uh, you may have it once in your life. And if you have a chicken, you're not going to eat it. You're going to want the eggs, right? So anyway, it's there's this kind of this code that if you say anything about fried chicken, you're like, oh, you've been secretly watching Crash Landing on You. But anyway, what this information, it's the young people. It's kind of like what happened in the Soviet Union. The young people, they're hungry for this outside information. During the famine, when you have all these people crossing the border, right? Word of mouth spread about what was happening in China because the regime tried to keep people from crossing the border, telling them that China, you can believe this, back in the 1990s, they said, don't go to China. China's in the middle of a civil war. You're going to be in more danger in China. But North Koreans were faced with this terrible choice: starve to death in North Korea or take our chances in China. Well, when they crossed the border, they were like, what? There's no civil war here. Look at all this prosperity. I mean, they were so impressed with what was happening in China. And I remember this one woman who was a doctor in Pyongyang. She watched her mother starve to death and her father starve to death, and she was a doctor in Pyongyang, and she finally said, "I've got to leave." During the famine, so she crossed the border into China, and the first place she approached was this farmhouse, and she noticed that there was a bowl outside the door of this farm, and she looked and it had meat in it, and she realized it was for the dog. And she said, oh my goodness, the dogs of China eat better than the doctors of North Korea. But if you can imagine the shock people had when they crossed the border and saw all the prosperity in China, then they would go back and tell people, and then before it, hundreds of thousands of people were crossing that border. But now today, the flow of information is also because the defectors came up with these ideas. They're the ones that came up with the rice bottles. They're the ones that came up with doing the balloon launches. Balloon launches used to be done by the American government back during the Cold War, Operation Geely, which is truth, Operation Truth. They were sending in stuff by balloons. So it was a method that was perfected. But the South Korean government during the leftist years stopped it. And so the defectors took it upon themselves. But these no-tells, this was totally the idea of the North Korean defectors. The North Korean People's Liberation Front, which is all former military defectors, they're the ones that came up with this idea. Let's get these no-tells. And so they started smuggling them in. This is long before COVID. This is like over the last 10 years. They started smuggling them in. The no-tell became so popular in North Korea that the regime was like, we can't stop it. So they decriminalized it and now lets people have it. And they started creating their own manufactured no-tells. But
Well,
they have to, this is the thing that scares them more than anything. Information, South Korean soap operas on here, K-pop music, American movies.
and we'll just be brief because I know you gave a big intro on Western Sahara before, but you kind of can you just contextualize it and tell us what are you doing now to help? Where does the situation stand in Western Sahara?
Well, we what's happened with Western Sahara is the Moroccans broke the ceasefire in November of 2020. They broke the ceasefire. They fired upon innocent Sahrawi civilians. And so this Polisario went back to war. The Polisario was promised, all they ever wanted was a referendum and their vote on self-determination. They had been at war since 1975 when the Moroccans invaded Western Sahara. The Sahrawis went to war. This used to be a colony of Spain, and they were promised by Spain they would have a vote on their future, and they never got that vote. Morocco invaded, Mauritania invaded. The Sahrawi people, they defeated the Mauritanians. The Mauritanians now support them. But what happened is they were at war until 1991, and the UN came in and said, we will give you a vote if you lay down your weapons. Well, the Sahrawi were like, the Polisario, which is their political movement, was like, that's all we ever wanted. So they laid down their weapons and said, let us have a vote. They've never gotten their vote. And it's because of the corruption of the United Nations. And now what happened is they're fed up. So November last year, the Moroccans fired upon Sahrawis. November 2020, fired upon Sahrawi citizens near the border area, and they went back to war. They're at war now. Tragically, Donald Trump recognized the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara. I think he was totally misguided. He was condemned by both his staunch allies like Senator James Inhofe and Democrats for doing that. We're hoping that Biden will reverse that because it, we never should have done that. We should be on the side of the Sahrawis. They are the people that formed a republic. Their constitution is modeled after ours, but they are at war right now. The Moroccans don't want you to know about it because they are uh, they they are at war, and they have been infiltrating and attacking into Morocco. And Moroccans don't want you to know about it. But these are amazing people who have a republic where women have equal rights. They're just trying to get their country back, and their whole idea right now is we either live or die. No different than the New Hampshire motto. But they got to the point where we have relied on the United Nations since 1991 to let us have a vote, and it's never happened. We're either going to live free or die, and they've gone back to war to liberate their homeland. And that's who we should be supporting. They're amazing people of great integrity, and they just got fed up with the lies of the United Nations. And again, women are in their leadership. Women have served as governors. Women have equal rights. They have a constitution modeled after ours. They want a free market economy, a religious freedom when they get their homeland back. They're everything we tried to achieve without success in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And they've got it. They understand that. They understand human dignity. And one quick story. I will never forget meeting a man with no legs who, during the conflict, he was a shepherd. The Moroccans would plant landmines. The Moroccans committed all kinds of atrocities against the Sahrawi, but they would plant landmines around the wells, which is a violation of Geneva Convention. Just total cruelty. The Moroccans dropped napalm on women and children and elderly. I mean, all these atrocities. But I met this man with no legs, and he told me the story about how he was going to feed his sheep, and there was a mine and it blew off his legs. They were in a Moroccan-controlled area. The Polisario soldiers heard about this man being injured, and they went to him in the Moroccan-controlled area where the Moroccan soldiers were in control to pick up the broken pieces of this man to save his life. And now he runs an NGO that focuses on landmines, but he lives in the refugee camps. But my point is, the love of human life, that is never more powerfully displayed, but that's what the Sahrawis are. They care about human life, and they've tried to resolve their issues through the UN, and they've been betrayed multiple times, and they deserve their freedom, and they deserve their homeland back. And so that's why I think Western Sahara is really important. We started a campaign, and I'll give you these links. The campaign to end the occupation of Western Sahara, the campaign to end Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara. It's again, grassroots individuals, Democrats, Republicans, people from all sides that are involved in it.
Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for sharing
Sure.
everything today. It's kind of like a trip down memory lane, but it's so important because I don't think people understand how grave the situation is in these parts of the world where the littlest thing, like, like a rice bottle, like you said, can make such a big difference or just give people hope. I mean, we've seen it here with Otto Warmbier, the young man, that the college student went to North Korea and literally just took down a sign, a poster, and they took his life because of it. I remember Robert Park walking across into North Korea and coming back, but being, completely broken as a person as a result of it. So thank you for all that you do. And I think we'll probably have to do a part 2 to finish talking about all these other stories, but I'm so grateful that you got to share those. So thank you.